Hello. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this topic. I'm always excited to talk about sleep technology and especially the role of the sleep technologist. Again, thank you, Andrea and team at EnsoData for entertaining this important topic. What I hope to do with this presentation is really uh, review some of the history and some of the work that's been done in researching how the sleep involved to meet present needs of sleep testing and in the sleep health market that we're in right now. We're going to look at some surveys that were done. We're going to look at some summit meetings that we've had and just really how leadership has come together to really try to prepare the sleep field for the changes that we're seeing. We're going to look at sleep technology specifically and how that's being used to progress sleep the sleep health space. We're going to look at job descriptions and the skill set needed for the sleep technologist to fulfill the new types of testing and the needs of the sleep profession. And then we'll look deeper into the sleep care versus sleep technology and what's involved with that.
So I'm not trying to be funny here, but it is interesting that the questions and the conversations that I've had over sleep testing and really is sleep programs and overnight sleep testing really dead right now because of home sleep testing. So, it is concerning, but it's not dying for sure. It's just growing, it's developing into something else. So the answer is no. Sleep testing in the hospital is very much alive, and it's actually thriving. And we'll get into the reasons why I say that.
There's definitely change. It's interesting. We started this conversation of home sleep testing back in 2009, really, and we see that there was a lot of changes when the first CMS approval for home sleep testing hit the market. And there was a lot of concern. How is this going to be managed? How are we going to manage the education of our patients, the testing, getting these patients treated? And really, it felt like there was a lot of pressure from payers and to move the industry into home testing, and there was a lot of fear. And so really, we looked at this upcoming technology really in 2009, and we watched this, and then we saw what happened on the East Coast when an insurance payer there really did flip the industry on its head very quickly with the use of home sleep testing. And we did have a summit at that time with the AAST. And so in 2013, we actually wanted to look at uh, what was happening with this shift of technology. So I was actually able to be part of this summit. It took place in September of 2013. We really had the goals of identifying the changes in the delivery of diagnostic, but also we wanted to get into the treatment and the services that were being offered in the sleep programs. We were looking at information from not only our payers, but we were looking from our physician leaders as well as the insurance companies. We're looking at our COA programs and really trying to predict the impact on sleep technologists. What were the new roles that we were going to, as a national organization, had to prepare for? And then really digging into what kind of appropriate education was needed for the technologists of the future. And during the summit, and it was a 2-day summit, it was extremely beneficial, but there was a clear consensus that regulatory and economic pressures were changing the way sleep disorders were being diagnosed and treated. And at that time, talking with insurance companies and leadership with our payers, the real pressure that the payers were feeling is that they needed to get more patients diagnosed. And they just felt like the home sleep testing gave them the ability to get more of their beneficiaries diagnosed, and then the sleepless centers could focus on having clear programs where the patients were going to get the diagnosis, then they could see the sleep specialist and get their treatment and manage outcomes from there. And so we saw, the national organizations really putting a shift from diagnosing and testing to outcomes management. And there had to be the programs, successful programs had to be able to shift and offer the home testing, but also offer patient education, monitoring, follow-up, and then we know that with that became this pressure of pre-authorization of what type of service was to be done. We know that even today the ASM is top of mind is advocating for prior authorization reform. All of a sudden we saw that this was incredibly burdensome on a sleep program to get the proper documentation in place and then get things submitted for a pre-authorization of type of diagnostic service that could be performed. In 2019, the ASM did a member survey and really was looking at work-related issues and the areas of concerns for ASM members. And in 2019, we still see that prior authorization requirements, declining reimbursement, fragmentation of care due to the way that patients could get their therapy at home. How were they getting their PAP equipment? Was it just being shipped to them and arrived on their doorstep? And then there's also the concerns of long wait times and the continued growth that they were seeing with the home sleep testing market. So this was, I thought, was an interesting graphic here of this open-ended question of what's your biggest frustration, what's your pain point, and the things that we predicted in 2013 continued to be an issue in 2019, continues to be the same issue that we see today. The AST followed up with a workforce survey in 2021. Now, what happened between 19 and 21? We can see that there was the pandemic, right? And so the workforce needs and the way that we were recovering from the pandemic, the economic pressures of that were extremely burdensome on a sleep program. I feel like we all deserve a certificate of completion of some sort of great acknowledgement that we survived providing this type of outpatient service during that pandemic. It was a crazy time for sure. And so the AST was really seeking feedback, and they really wanted to look at a broad spectrum of professionals. Professionals who influence and provide sleep therapy, including physicians, dentists, nurses, sleep managers, technicians, your DME companies. So the AST conducted an outreach survey, and they really wanted, we actually worked with another company to have the survey distributed so that we could try to get all these stakeholders involved in our feedback. The ultimate goal of this pan-industry survey was to create a report that showcased a perspective of different stakeholders. So, the things that concern me as an operations administrator is different than a physician who is taking care of their patients. So they really wanted to look at the different groups, look at the future of sleep technology, and then the goal would be to host a summit partnering these different organizations together and really determine key trends and had they changed from when we did a similar type of summit back in 2013. It's an interesting thing here with the poll question. I was just really wondering to know if there was feedback on how many of sleep programs saw a decline in attended studies. And when we did this poll, when I was doing this live, we saw it was about 50% saw a decline. So what the survey actually tells us is that while there is stability or growth for many that responded, nearly 1/5 reported a decrease in in-lab sleep studies. Most of them were moving to the home in replacement. It was actually a decline in overall testing and the financial outlook that were significant drivers of a negative response surrounding the outlook for sleep centers. Fewer techs believed that sleep centers had a strong outlook. than those that were more senior. Like the managers were a little bit more comfortable, but the technologists certainly were not. So many of the sleep technologists are not aware of new opportunities. They're not prepared to assume these new roles. Additional education, especially on the soft skills like critical thinking skills, being adaptable, and looking at other areas to improve the sleep program. These are the kind of things that the AST really saw as an opportunity to help our sleep technologists. And I think when you look at the technology piece, we can look at not just home sleep testing as driving changes in the market, but also the use of telehealth. We saw that really explode during the pandemic. It's something that is a really good fit for sleep programs. But we also have the consumable wearables, the automated scoring technologies, and things like that that AI can help with.
So with the information that we gathered from our survey, the AST did put together a workforce summit, and that was in April of 2022. It was interesting. We had over 25 participants join the summit. We had representation from the AAST, the AASM, the BRPT, Behavioral Sleep Medicine. We even had a medical attorney there, as well as industry representation. So I was able to speak along with Dr. Khosla on the advancement in home sleep testing. It was really it was a great experience to be able to present with Dr. Khosla and get her experience, her perspective. And we had the same mindset that with the home sleep testing program, you have to remember the tech's role as well, because that's where the patient education and things come into. Sam from Enzo was able to speak on the advancement of AI and how that supported sleep programs. Catherine Hansen and Larry Fordyce, they did a great job talking about behavioral sleep medicine and advancement education that's needed to support the sleep coaching role in managing sleep care plans. And then we had Andrea Ramberg and Dr. Williams speak on the changes in the workforce. So it was a very cohesive group, and we really did have a nice time reviewing the survey and strategizing.
And then we looked into more of this changes in workforce by Andrea was actually able to participate with that as well. So here's a picture of our group. It was fun. It was a 2-day summit. We met in Chicago at the AAST headquarters there, and it was just a really good exchange. And really personally, what I got out of this summit was the need to work together. And so this is not a silo profession. We actually need the technologist supporting the doctor supporting the technologist. We need industry to really listen to what the pain points are in sleep programs and to figure out how to partner with programs to make it more efficient and to really be able to respond to these changes in healthcare. And then making sure we're all protected, right? And at the end of the day, it's all about safe patient care and safe programs. So I was really happy to be part of this summit meeting.
So looking at the home sleep test model, we do know that it has become the preferred method of sleep testing for OSA. We definitely saw this being accelerated by the pandemic, when we had all of a sudden the need to see patients outside of the clinic, mailing devices, using disposable devices. It really did accelerate the use of home sleep testing in our program. And I believe it did nationwide as well. So in order to set sleep technologists up for future success, conversations must be held around sleep technologists' current education needs, as well as the role of the future sleep technologists, and especially related to patient care, patient outcomes. The summit had a lengthy discussion how sleep professionals and vendors, insurance companies, we all must work collectively in order to find success with home sleep test programs and overall patient treatment. It's interesting when you look at looking at staffing shortages and things that also affects your ability to grow your program. We see this in our business as well, where we have patient or techs that are very comfortable working at night. They don't necessarily want to come to days and grow the home sleep testing program. So we've had to really recruit for that role. We've put lead technologists in that role to really help grow that program, manage the devices, when do they get returned, how they're cleaned, etc.
When we look at the ASM and their support of the use of home sleep testing, they have come out with positions on when it's appropriate to use a home sleep test. So this is also something that's very important to understand. This has to be diagnosed by a sleep-trained physician. It is something when you're looking for OSA and primary snoring, but it has to be appropriate. Home sleep testing is not a screener. If somebody says, I have a sleep complaint, and you really don't support a test, you just don't do home sleep testing to screen them for a disorder. It actually is a diagnosis that you would get from this type of testing. So this position paper or clinical guideline is important to understand. We also have advancement in education that's needed. When we look at the summit and what came out, the sleep community as a whole must collaborate to facilitate this change. The role of the sleep technologist is drastically different than what it looked like in the past. Sleep care is moving away from relying on that traditional testing that a sleep technologist would do and moving more towards a sleep technologist that is competent in understanding and the patient, to motivate the patient to get treatment, right? So this is where that CCSH role is becoming more popular. There's more patients experiencing sleep disorders that are medically complex. And so really understanding how their existing medical conditions fit into the sleep complaints and how they support each other and affect each other, the sleep technologist can really help bridge that and help coordinate that patient's care to improve outcomes, especially with those complex patients. And what's interesting in our program is not only do we have to worry about the home sleep testing and education, but our complex patients are going into the sleep lab. So now the patients that are in the lab are all very medically complex. And so we have to make sure that our attended studies, that our techs there have the proper education too, to make sure our patients are getting the proper treatment. So there are several education needs have been identified through the summit, and really things to address is that we need more of these entry-level certificate degree programs. We need to target education on this complex sleep medical issues, focus education on motivating patients to complete their studies and treatment and get follow-up care. There's a broader level of education is needed. Ongoing education is a must. So how do you get that met in your organization? And I know this is something that was a big topic of discussion, is really that professional growth that is needed for all of our team members. So the educational skill set that we talked about was really being able to clinically evaluate our patients, making sure that we have proper documentation. We have a front office team that we actually end up having to educate on how to interpret or how to read a sleep interpretation, how to read physician notes, make sure that documentation requirements for payment are being met. And so here's just kind of a guideline of some of the new opportunities. But really, that long-term care was something that was a big topic at our summit, is really understanding that what are the behavioral changes that patients need to make, what are their chronic care conditions, and how does that affect sleep, vice versa. So this this experience of being part of this summit, I really was able to look at it and bring it back to my own business, being able to develop ways to improve and provide a safe patient care, fiscally responsible business model. And this is what I think about all day, every day. We actually developed an HST tech role. We had to also develop a lead HST tech role because really tracking when these units left, when they came back, did really. We also have a whole process of educating our patients prior to them using the device. And so we have education sessions set up. And so, making sure that patients understand they have to show up and get trained in how to use the device. And that's when you can get them to understand why this testing is important. We have, like I said, you have to look at how you're going to get your consent signs, and so there's a lot of different things that we had to develop a brand new job description to encompass. So, taking a peek at what we're doing locally with my own company, I was able to take that information from the summit and say, okay, what kind of operational efficiencies can I expand in with my own business? And it's interesting because when I look at the growth of home sleep testing in my business model, we see that now we're at 60%, which is what we predicted we would be doing after we came back from the pandemic. And so we've increased our home sleep testing, but we've also trying to increase our in-lab testing, which are more complex patients. So we're trying to keep a balance there of what we're able to do. We did decide to use AI to expand our diagnostic data to include sleep and wake analysis. We now bill out the 95800, and we're able to use different devices and have consistent reporting by using this AI to do that. AI-assisted scoring has allowed us to manage costs. We were able to grow our business and do more procedures and maintain our core team of scorers. And by not having to do that and expand our scores, we're able to really manage the unique needs of all of our interpreting doctors. We actually were an early adopter of AI-assisted scoring. We actually did this in 2018. We did take the time and invested in doing this machine learning with the Enso team and fine-tuning it. And then now we're able to review the data and really focus on the unique guidelines and setting up the report for our doctors. Now, one of the things is that we had to focus on our failed home sleep test and did we have the appropriate data to validate a diagnosis? When do we recommend an attended study to follow up? And so AI has allowed us to focus on these other parts of the program too, and not just getting the data out, getting a report, and making sure that the patients do the study. It's important to recognize that we didn't adopt AI-assisted scoring without shifting our mindset of our scoring team. Our MDs adapted to it much faster than our sleep technologists. So AI can't replace the clinical expertise and the discernment my team needed to use it. It was used to make their life easier. And now they're very happy to never have to count PLMs. So the clinical team at Enso did help communicate how AI Assistant could help them so that they could expand into these other things. So it's good. So it's important to keep our team happy and make sure they feel valued and give them the operational efficiencies to get this done. So I love that, Andrea, how you actually talked to our team and said that AI supercharged our team. So they talk about being supercharged. So that was great.
So the sleep technologist skill level is changing. We need sleep technologists with formal education in our sleep programs. The technologists of the future will need to be able to interact at a professional level with physicians, other healthcare professionals, and patients. Medical literacy, including the ability to explain Complex medical issues to patients will be a part of this required skill set. Patient education, including individual and group sessions. Self-directed care and motivational enhancement for patients is going to be something we understand how to do. And as the focus in medicine shifts from diagnosis to adherence, technologists will need to become more competent in health, behavioral health, psychology methods, motivating patients for compliance. And we can't forget the fact that we are now performing more complex types of ventilatory support. Having that respiratory-based knowledge is going to be essential in order to treat our complex patients. We're using advanced titration modes such as AVAPS and ASV. We don't use dead space therapy in our business, but other facilities do. We're also seeing a lot more oral appliance. So you have to be also familiar with all the surgical treatments, and is there an opportunity to do, inspired titrations and such in your sleep centers. Really, on-the-job training is something that can support the skill set for a technologist, but the formal education is becoming very important.
So where do we start? Well, we do need to make sure that our technologists understand the different modalities, why we need them. We need to look at patients' collective comorbidities, do chart reviews, figure out which way is going to be the best way to treat this patient. We need to understand our basic CPAP, but we also need to understand the bilevels. When is it appropriate to be used, especially with our complex patients like hypoventilation, COPD, hypercapnic respiratory failure. Them really understanding ASV and AVAPS is another really important piece of continued education for our techs. And this is difficult. One of the things that I've decided to do is the AST has this advanced sleep titration e-learning course. I was able to be part of putting this together, and AST has now offered an ability for me to buy this for my entire team. And so I'm able to purchase a module that my entire team, whether they're AST members or not, which I'm always trying to encourage them to be members, but if they're not, they would still get the 6 credits of CEE. So look into that. See if that's an option for your program, to look at some of the modules that they have out there and use it as a way to provide education in your programs. When we look at sleep care versus sleep technology, we know that sleep care is that wellness coach, that clinical sleep health educator, that patient care coordinator. And so where the technology is more the testing, and not to diminish that, because we have testing of very complex patients. So we have to just kind of look at what role are we needing our techs to fulfill. I was also able in my live presentation to ask how many programs out there had a OSA screening program. And interesting, I think we got about a 30% reply saying that yes, they were implementing or already had a pre-surgical OSA program. So there are many inpatient program successes. It also provides safety protocols for high-risk patients, such as elevating your head 30 degrees or avoid sleeping flat. Use multimodal pain management and monitoring of the SpO2 and end-tidal CO2 of these patients. So we even have heard of some programs that provide BiPAP therapy while they're hospitalized to really make sure that they're being taken care of, and then they get transferred to an OSA provider. So the tools needed for screening programs is you really need your leadership buy-in. I was able to work with Andrea on a task force to create the tech guideline for screening for inpatient screening program. Emerson Kerr chaired that, and we did that, I think, in 2018. So the AST does have some programs and some guidelines there for you to look at for how to set up an inpatient program. And I thought it was interesting is really understanding who would be your champion in your hospital to approve this program. It may be your CFO. Your CFO may be looking at ways to reduce readmission. It may be your safety officer that's looking at ways to reduce our risk of an untreated sleep apnea patient. So if you're using an EMR, you definitely have the data, but getting the reports you need from your EMR could be onerous. So my advice to you is if you're working with a team to develop reports from your EMR, is really make it a safety initiative. We have to understand our high-risk complex patients, and make this an actual assessment that we're pulling vitals from the EMR and data of how many of these patients need to be seen by a sleep program.
I just read an interesting article in the Journal of American Heart Association looking at PAP adherence and healthcare resource utilization in patients with obstructive sleep apnea and heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. And we know this is a patient population that's actually been difficult to treat due to the complications that we're seeing with low ejection fraction and use of ASV. So it was an interesting article. They did, in order to qualify it, they did look at 3 levels of adherence, and they defined that as an adherent patient was somebody who met the CMS criteria for all 4 consecutive months. So these would be the 90-day timelines, 4 quarters, and within the for the first year, did they use it for more than 4 hours? The non-adherent patients were those who do not meet the CMS criteria in any of the 4 quarters, whereas the intermediate adherent patients had to meet it in at least 1, but no more than 3 quarters. So we had the adherent, non-adherent, and intermediate. The conclusion was that PAP therapy adherence in patients with OSA, and these patients with this ejection fraction that was low, there was an association of reduction in healthcare resource utilization. So PAP therapy did help these patients. And so this suggests that there should be a greater emphasis on diagnosing and effectively treating OSA patients with heart failure and a reduced ejection fraction. And who better to help support this group of patients than a sleep technologist? I mean, really monitoring these patients and making sure that we have adherence to therapy. So I just shared this here for your reference.
So for a conclusion, we have to start as a sleep industry to reinforce that sleep is more than just a diagnostic study. It's as important for wellness as nutrition is for wellness. So when you look at that, we have to figure out ways to retain and grow our sleep technologists. They have a new delivery care model that they need to be adaptable to learn. It's a mind shift. We have to shift from just how many tests can I get done to how many tests can I get done with the patient getting treatment. We do know that there are billing codes out there for remote patient monitoring and patient education. Our national organizations must continue to advocate and expand what that qualified personnel is that can use these billing codes. And we know this is a state-by-state requirement and standards associated with it. So some states, the CCSH is acceptable and some aren't. I cannot get into that in this presentation. That's something that you have to work with at a state-by-state level, looking at that. But we do need to continue to expand that the sleep technologist has a role in this ongoing education and can get paid for that.
Sleep technologists must keep current on the changing technology. The ASM has put together an interesting resource for its members. It's a directory of devices and apps. It does a really good job of summarizing the products, and it's easy to find a product that you might be looking for, something your patients brought in or talking about. So technology innovation positively can influence the impact on patients, on the sleep team. This is evolving. we have to keep current on these types of technology that's out there. Innovation's there, and I think our devices are going to get smaller and more wearable, and we want to make sure we know what's coming up in the market. So it's a good resource.
So I appreciate your time and thank you for allowing me to participate. Sleep well.